Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Team Comp Tuesday, a series where every Tuesday we take a look at a different team in Genshin. This week we have Hu Tao. She's the next banner coming up in a couple days here, so I figured we'd do a Hu Tao team before we go back and revisit some more Alhaitham and Zhao teams. I'm probably going to do all of Hu Tao's main teams in this one video since they all follow very similar concepts. Hu Tao basically has one team and it's vape teams. There's one other team, but it's a super speedrunny team where you're just using her ult basically to melt off an Ayaka burst, but it's like hyper speedrunny, not really a realistic team. So we're just going to be covering the standard Hu Tao setup, and I want to thank you for coming out, and I hope you enjoy. And if you want to check out any other of the teams we've done, there's a playlist on the channel. Let's get into it. Alright, so really quickly I just want to talk about Hu Tao's role and whether you should basically her pool value, that stuff really briefly. So Hu Tao is a on-field pyro damage dealer who generally takes not quite as much time as a hyper carry, but not quite as much time as a quick swap unit. She's kind of in that sweet spot that a lot of Genshin's units are, and why hyper carries generally tend to be a little bit weaker is because units like Hu Tao or Child only take maybe like 8 to 12 seconds of a rotation on field, which lines up a lot better with a lot of the off-field applicators, as opposed to the generally much longer, close to 20-second on-field time requirements of a lot of the hypercarry units. But she does a ton of single target pyro damage. She does have some small AoE capabilities with some of her dash cancels. But just a quick note about this character in general. Would I recommend her? I think she's a lot of fun. She's probably my favorite unit next to Zhao. At least definitely my favorite unit to build around besides Zhao. And she's one of the characters that definitely scales really well with how good you are at them, which is kind of fun. Because there's a lot of like tricks and efficiency that you can get with this character the longer you spend on them. So she's kind of nice in that way. And that the time you put into her is rewarded with more damage, as opposed to like a character like, let's say, Yoimiya, where you just slamming left click as hard as humanly possible all the time, which there's nothing wrong with that. Some people prefer that style, but it's nice to have a character whose DPS can vary based on how well you play them, but it can also be annoying. You don't really need her. You don't need any units in this game. Need is a strong word, but in general, her pool value hasn't necessarily gone down. But there's now plenty of teams that are easier to play that have similar damage outputs. So roll for her if you want. I would highly recommend it. I think she is one of the most fun play styles. I think most of the community agrees with me on this. She's arguably one of, if not the most popular unit in the game, outside of like Kazuha. Not necessarily for like usage rates, but like as characters people really like, she's one of, if not the most popular units in the game. She's also the unit that scales the best with low amounts of investment. Like, if getting her C1 and getting Staff of Homa are pretty substantial DPS increases. She's still very good without them. I played mine for about a year before I recently, when she came around a year and a half ago or so, I picked up a Homa and I actually ended up with C2, but I went for C1, which... If you want to play her, I would highly recommend going for the C1 if feasibly possible. Don't feel like you need to spend money. You don't have to. But if you think you want to commit to her, it's definitely worth considering. The C1 just makes her feel a lot better. But you can get around not having the C1 if you want, and she's still a very solid unit. And we're going to be going over that in the upcoming sections. Alright, so real brief, let's talk about why C1 is really nice. So what her C1 does is it means that when she has her E activated, her charge attacks do not consume stamina. Her E is basically her damage steroid that makes her do pyro damage and stuff like that. So the reason that's important is because Hu Tao does want to charge attack. It is her highest like damage modifier skill. is how she does most of her damage. So at C1, this means that you can do what are called dash cancels. Let me show you real quick on this golem here. So you can dash at the end of your charge attack string to get more hits. Oops, I accidentally killed it. But anyway, yeah, you can dash at the end of your thing here, and when your charge attacks do not consume stamina, you can do more than if you try to do this normally. So if I try to do this now without my E active, so I don't have my C1 to cancel it, you can do like 5 or 6 generally without that, but with it active, you can generally do 10 is a very realistic number, but if you're frame perfect, you can get up to around 12. There is a workaround for this, though. If you want to play C0 Hu Tao, totally playable. Again, I played it for like over a year before I decided to commit to the C1. But you can do what are called jump cancels instead, which is where as soon as like the little forward section of the pole hits, you jump. And this lets you get more charge attacks per stamina consumption. You can generally get about, if you do it perfectly, you can get about 8 inside of an E, 8 or 9 around inside of an E, which is still a ton of damage. It does limit the AoE capabilities, because the thing about dash cancels is you can actually hold the charge attack to go a little bit farther and then cancel the dash at a farther range. Whereas with jump cancels, you're trying to cancel it basically as soon as it does the forward attack. It takes a bit of practice, and I'm a bit out of practice because I haven't done a lot of jump cancels recently. But yeah, this character is, generally you want to use these animation cancels, so if you don't really want to bother learning them, then I maybe would consider steering clear. She's still decent without them, but to really get her potential out, you want to use your jump cancels. And there's 2 like basic combos for my C0 players. You want to do the N1, which is 1 normal attack. This is generally to apply like Hydro from Rain Swords or something like that. Just also because you have to, you can't just charge attack. So you do N1C and then jump at the end of it. And then for my C1 and above players, what you want to do is you want to do 2 normal attacks before you dash. This is to give the Hydra aura enough time to actually apply before you vape it with your charge attack. This is to better line it up. You can do N1C and then dash if you're C1, but you'll misalign some of your Hydra applications, so I personally recommend the N2 dash. If you want to be really technical, what you should do is the first one you should do an N1 dash, and then after that go into N2 dashes. But yeah, that's just some brief explanation of her combo kind of thing. She is one of the more combo-ish reliant characters. And there's some other ones once you get comfortable with her. Like, there's some crazy strings. You can find some of them online for really optimized. But in general, that's what you want to stick to. C0, N1, CJ, or N1 charge jump. And if you have C2, you can do N2 dash. N2 charge dash. If you have C0 and you want to do dash cancels for some reason, which you actually can still do, you'll just get much less of them. Then you want to do N1 dashes, generally. Or you can do N2s to let some of your stamina come back if you want. But yeah. Alright, now we're going to go over some of the builds. We're going to start it off with kind of the core of every Hu Tao team. So we're the Hu Tao plus Xingqiu. The reason specifically for Xingqiu we'll get to when we ever get to him, but first let's talk about Hu Tao. Weapons, you have some pretty good options here. Homa obviously being her best in slot, made for her. It's a nice damage increase if you want to go for it, but don't feel like you have to. Any 5-star polearm is good. Actually, both of the ones I have here are pretty solid for her as well. If you have them, Jade Spear is pretty good, and Staff of Scarlet Sands is actually as well pretty decent for her. So any of those are fine. Deathmatch is perfectly fine. I used Deathmatch for a long time. I was Deathmatch R0 gaming, and she still absolutely slapped. Got me my first 36 star back when she originally came out. She, trust me, plenty of damage here. Don't feel like you need to go for anything crazy. Other options are Dragon's Bane. Dragon's Bane is really good as well. It can be kind of hard to get the crit that you need with it, but it is undeniably a very strong weapon for her, especially at high refinements. It can be very competitive with a lot of the non-Homa options. The Blackcliff polearm is okay as well, but I think if you don't have a Dragon's Bane and you're looking for a free-to-play option, I think R5 White Tassel is the way to go. You do some normal attacks, so the bonus here is pretty good. A high crit rate on the weapon here. It's 9% here, but it gets pretty high. And the low base attack doesn't actually matter a ton for Hu Tao due to how her kit works. Now for artifacts, you have a couple options here. There's 3 good 4 sets, but one of them I don't like. So there's Shimenawa, Crimson Witch, and the new, what's it called? The Gilded Dreams set. All 3 of these are pretty okay for her. Crimson Witch being the best by a very slight margin. I personally do not like Shimenawas myself because I play Hu Tao exclusively in teams without healers. So not having... and I have a good amount of energy recharge in my substats on this set, so I can burst basically every rotation. So the downside of losing 15 energy is pretty rough. But if you want to use Shimenawa, especially if you have a good one from farming up your emblem, feel free to. Also, don't sleep on 2-piece 2-piece. 2-piece 2-piece is very close to her 4-set options due to the fact that none of the sets are super tailor-made to her kit. Your options are 2-piece Millilith, Crimson, Wanderers, Gilded, basically any of the elemental masteries, pyro damage, and HP. As she is, I think I forgot to mention this, but she does convert HP to attack at a really good rate, so generally HP is better on her than attack is. But do not overlook how good substats are for her. Now for the artifact set or types, you want either crit rate or crit damage on your circlet. I still need a better circlet. Even after all this time, all my circlets are absolute garbage for her, despite her being my main character. She wants a pyro damage. One of my main characters. She's a pyro damage goblet. And then you have 2 options. You either go HP Sands or you can go Elemental Mastery Sands. Whichever one you has better substats on is generally better, with Elemental Mastery being technically the better option for the most part. It is a little bit better than HP, but if you're not running if you run no shielders, no healers on your Hu Tao team, it could be a little bit more comfy to go with the HP Sands instead, or whichever one you have better substats on. Like if you look at this, I have significantly better substats on my HP Sands than on my EM Sands. And then just really briefly, we'll talk about the constellations again. C1 is really nice. If you want to play her a lot, I would kind of recommend it. It's pretty nice if you can swing it. If you don't know if you like her, but you think you might want to try her, you can get her C0 and upgrade later if you want. But I do think it is I think it's probably the only 5-star constellation that I would maybe recommend if you actually want to play the character a lot, because it fundamentally changes how you can play the character as compared to a lot of 5-star constellations, which just slap some extra damage on, which isn't really needed. But yeah, talents, all 3 of her talents are important, so you want to level them all up. Generally, the auto is the best, the afterlife is the 3rd, and her ult is last. You don't really have to level her ult if you do not want to, but I would highly recommend it personally, since it does do a lot of damage. Just a quick note on how she works. So basically, she turns HP into attack for herself. So that's why you build some HP on her, but she also has a mechanic where is it here? Whenever you're under 50% HP, you get a pyro damage bonus on top of a damage bonus to your burst, which can be quite good and generally means it's worth keeping her relatively low HP, which is why you'll see people not run healers with her often, because you want to keep her at that relatively low HP. But also she does heal herself with her burst, so she can kind of sustain herself pretty well as well. So that's another reason not a lot of people run her with healers. Although that is, honestly, if you're C0 gaming, or even if you're above that, we'll get to it. But healers aren't as bad as a lot of people think for her, especially if they offer buffs in other areas. But anyway, that's Hu Tao. Alright, and now we're going to go to her partner in crime, Xingqiu. Now, why Xingqiu specifically? Xingqiu is quite a bit better than Yelan for Hu Tao specifically, due to the fact that he has more hydro application. You need more hydro application in order to keep Hu Tao vaporizing as much as humanly possible. On top of that, he offers some damage reduction, which is very nice to have with Hu Tao, since it's very common to, like I said, not run a healer or a shielder with her sometimes, depending on how comfortable you are with her. So having that little bit of damage reduction can really help there. Weapons for Xingqiu, Sacrificial Sword. If you are going to run double Hydro, you can swap this out for a more damaging option, something like Black Cliff or even Black Sword for those stats. Lion's Roar is okay here, but I wouldn't really recommend it since you won't be triggering the passive a lot. But you can always just keep him on Sack Sword if you prefer. I prefer to just not have to bother swapping him, so I just keep him on Sack Sword. Artifacts, again, 4-piece emblem is the way you should go. I just have old pieces with pretty good substats, and I would need to farm a 4th good emblem set in order to put an emblem set on him. So that's why I use this 2-piece combo. But if you for some reason also have really good 2 pieces of like Noblesse Heart of Deaths or Heart of Depths and attack percent, feel free to use it. Just know that emblem is generally where you want to be. Energy recharge or attack on these sands. Attack is generally more damage. Energy recharge is a little bit comfier. I tend to over energy recharge my supports just so I make sure I have their bursts up in every rotation. And there are some teams where, like in this team specifically, when I'm running double Hydro, I could swap this for an attack sands, no problem. But sometimes in single Hydro situations, you'll want the energy recharge. You just kind of have to toy with that a little bit, but if you want to just put one on and forget about it, energy recharge is the way to go. Hydro bonus on the goblet, and then either crit rate or crit damage on the circlet talents. But you want to level both the E and the burst. The E just does a butt load of damage, and also increases the damage reduction of the skill, which is pretty nice. And burst just does a lot of damage and a really good hydro app, so it's definitely worth leveling because it can be a pretty significant portion of the team's damage. Alright, now we're going to go over the next slot that is relatively consistent across Hu Tao teams. We will have a section at the end where I just kind of rapid fire through a lot of the a lot of the other options you have outside of her kind of core 2 setups. But one that is pretty common to those setups is a VV unit. Generally, Kazuha is the way to go. If you have him, Sucrose also works very well. We'll talk about her in a second. Favonius Sword. on Kazuha, EM. Talents, Burst is the main one to level, but if you want to level his E and Auto to get more damage from that. The reason to go Favonius is a couple reasons. A, more energy to the team is just generally means more burst uptime, which means more damage. B, his burst does a ton of damage. It's actually kind of underappreciated how much damage it does, so I would highly recommend trying to burst every rotation if humanly possible. So that's why the energy recharge over just, say, going Iron Sting and getting some more attack. Obviously, very good because of the Viridescent Shred and the damage buff shared to Hu Tao. Your other good option is Sucrose here. Weapons, I would actually go Sack Frags here. Hu Tao doesn't really care about the TTDS buff, so I would personally go Sack Frags here. Just more energy, more grouping, more Elemental Mastery, and Sucrose, all good stuff. Artifact sets, literally the exact same set as Kazuha, EM, as much Elemental Mastery as humanly possible. Get some energy recharge substats if you can in there to help get burst back. For talents on Sucrose, E and Burst are kind of worth leveling if you want to. You actually don't really have to level any of Sucrose's talents if you don't want to, as she's mainly there for the VV Shred and the Elemental Mastery buffs she gives, since Hu Tao is obviously such a good user of Elemental Mastery. This is just the chef's kiss. Alright, now let's talk about that fourth slot. There's kind of two ways that you can take it, really. Or two ways that it is mainly taken. That is either to go with a second Hydro option or a second Pyro option. You have a couple options in both. I'm going to a couple options for second Pyro. Double Hydro, just a very strong core. Yelan plus Xingqiu, a lot of synergies, a lot of value to put them both together. If you can stretch it, if you have a team on the other side that needs neither, this is definitely a very good use of both of them. Weapons for Yelan, Favonius Warbow. If you have it, Elegy is way better for this team. I do not have Elegy. Her personal bow is kind of okay, but to be completely honest with you, Energy Recharge and Fav is great for this team, so there's even technically an argument to be made to just run Fav instead. But Fav bow is amazing. You should use a Fav bow on her. Artifacts, 4-piece, Emblem, Hydro Bonus, Goblet, crit rate or crit damage, Circlet, and then HP Sands. If you do have her personal bow, the one that has a big, or you want to use any of the crit rate stat sticks, I would highly recommend going in Energy Recharge Sands, since you need the energy recharge. Talents, E and Burst are the ones you want to level, as they are your primary sources of damage and you don't really care about your auto attack. Now let's go over some of the other options for that fourth slot. Let's go for the surprise one first. Bennett. Yes, so Hu Tao has that passive that gives her more damage when she's below 33%. Yeah, Bennett buff plus Noblesse is often big enough to just say, no, it's just better to be in Bennett Burst. Sometimes it's negligible, sometimes it's close, but especially if you're not a Staffahoma C1 gamer, like, Bennett can very easily be the way to go, especially because often if you're doing jump cancels, you're significantly more likely to get hit by stuff than if you're doing dash cancels, so for that reason, Bennett is the way to go. Weapons, Energy Recharge Sword or High Base Attack is the way to go generally, so Aquila being probably your best in slot if you have it. Other options include stuff like another Favonius Sword, even possibly Sack Sword, but that Sumeru Craftable Sword that I talk about every time I talk about Bennett, yet I still don't have on my account because I don't want to spend the resources on it yet, that is probably the best option to use here. I just use the Festering Desire because I just have it from forever ago. But the reason the Sumeru Craftable Sword is so good is because it has the max base attack for a 4-star at the same number as this, so the 565. Technically there's one sword that's higher, but let's not go over that. But it has an energy recharge passive and also has a minorly useful buff, so I would highly recommend getting that if you don't have another sword already built, or even if you do and you just want to up your Bennett game a little bit. That's the way to go. Artifact set, 4-piece Noblesse, 2 directions you can take this. You can either go HP Goblet, HP Circlet for full healer, or you can go Pyro, Circlet, Pyro Goblet, and Energy Recharge Sands. On both sets, Energy Recharge Sands, because you want to burst as much as humanly possible. For what you care about leveling up, you really only need to worry about leveling up your burst. You can level up your E if you want, but your burst is really the only skill you care about, to be completely honest with you, because that's where the money happens. Alright, now let's talk about some of the other supports. Let's talk about some of the other options you have for the slot. Toma is actually a decent option here, as the shield is relatively nice. And he just can offer Hu Tao some okay utility. Weapons, Fav-Lance, way to go. You could run Black Cliff here, or sorry, excuse me, Black Tassel here, but he generally needs a lot of energy recharge, so Favonius Lance is the way to go. Again, a 4-piece Noblesse is really nice. Energy recharge, HP, talents. You just really care about his burst here, which is a shield. You can level his E if you want for a little bit more damage, and it also actually does... Sorry, excuse me. The shield is from the E, it gets increased by the burst per hit. So you want to level the E and the burst. My mistake. I apologize. A couple reasons why Toma can be pretty good are just, obviously, the shield is really nice. Double Pyro for Pyro Res. And then also, if you eventually get up to it here, his C6 here gives a pretty decent charge attack bonus for Hu Tao. Now, you want to hear about the real spicy, the real, like, kind of crazy support. So let me tell you about Amber's support for Hu Tao. This really only works if you have Elegy. So you slap Elegy on her, you slap, where is it? You slap Instructor Set on her, since she can really easily proc it with her burst to give Elemental Mastery to Hu Tao. And ideally, you also play this when you have C6 to give movement speed and attack. And this is like the weirdest, probably most out there Hu Tao support that is unironically really good. If you have it and want to play with it, be my guest and go for it. But I think really quickly, I just want to go over the differences between the two main setups of Hu Tao and why you might want to use each or and kind of the advantage of each. So Xingqiu and Yellen as the double Hydro core for Hu Tao is quite good, because you can use VV to increase the Hydro damage of them. They both just do a lot of off-field Hydro damage, and they both just have decent buffs for Hu Tao that just give her some nice damage bonus. In general, this is kind of the default team a lot of people go to, and it generally is most of the time it'll end up being the better option of the two, but it can have the downside, obviously, of course, is you have to have Yellen, and you do have to use Yellen and Xingqiu for this team, so you can't necessarily do something like play Yelan and El Hytham Hyper Bloom team on the other side or something like that. Oh, by the way, if you have to split them up and you have to decide which one do I give to Hu Tao and which one do I give to like a Hyper Bloom team, Xingqiu goes to Hu Tao, Hyper Bloom goes to, or Yelling can go to Hyper Bloom or something. In general, you want to keep Xingqiu with whoever's vaporizing because he has the better Hydro application unless you have like C4 Yellen. So in general, keep Xingqiu with Hu Tao. So also, Xingqiu, I believe it's one of his constellations, shreds Hydro Resistance. Yeah, so one of his things here shreds Hydro Resistance, which will also increase Yelan's damage. So they just kind of complement each other relatively well. It also triggers Hydro Resonance, which does give Hu Tao more damage. Max HP by 25. Hu Tao does more damage, or gets more attack for the more HP she has, so that's good. Also makes Yelan do some more damage. So that's why that combo is pretty good. The other option, though, is a Pyro plus a second Pyro unit. And the reason a second Pyro unit can be good is because it allows you to VV off Pyro. It is very hard, if not impossible, unless you do something weird like Burst at the beginning of your rotation, to be able to VV the Pyro to increase Hu Tao's personal damage. So in a double Hydro setup, you're just VVing the Hydro to increase the Yelan and Xingqiu off-field damage, but you're not actually increasing Hu Tao's damage. But having a second pyro unit that can apply pyro before you do that can alleviate that. And also with certain units or with practice, you can actually double VV, so you can increase both Hu Tao's damage and Xingqiu's damage. So this generally ends up being very similar in damage. It's just that often to get the double pyro setups to be as good as the double hydro setups generally takes a bit more practice and a bit more work. So that's why most people tend to default to the double hydro setup.
You are not welcome here.
Alright, and now real quick, we're just going to rapid fire through the rest of the options you have for Hu Tao. Now, in any of the team comps, you are always free to replace the VV unit with Zhongli. In fact, if you do not have CC1 or C1, I would kind of almost recommend it, as it'll stop you from getting hit and shriggity shreked. Favonius Lance, or honestly, in this team comp, Black Tassel is probably better, to be completely honest with you. You don't really need the particles a ton, but Favonius Lance is nice for your team. Let me grab his actual lance. There you go. The Favonius Lance is nice for the team. Artifact set, Tenacity of the Millilith is pretty good. Extra shield strength, some attack bonus. If you want to, though, you can actually use Petra and make sure you catch the Petra buff on the right player if you want to. But I just use Millilith just so I never have to swap him. HP, generally the way to go. Don't build for meteor damage. Meteor is almost always a DPS loss. Takes way too long to cast. Talents, you really just need to level up the shield, to be completely honest with you. That's what he's here for. He's here to level up the shield. But I level up the meteor for fun, okay? I just said it's not that good, and it isn't that good, but sometimes you cast it for an iframe. Sometimes you cast it because it looks cool, and it's fun when it does damage, okay? So, despite what I said, yes, I do sometimes hit the meteor, but if you want to be completely honest with yourself, just level that. Now let's briefly talk about some of the other options. If you don't have double hydro, don't want to run double pyro, you can opt into double geo with albedo. I used this for a while, especially back before Yelan came out and before Toma came out. It's pretty good. Cinnabar Spindle for him if you have it, if you weren't here for the event. Harbinger of Dawn, artifacts, Husk of Opulent Dreams, geo damage, crit rate or crit damage, circlet, defense, sands, talents, level the E, level the burst. Just make sure you cast the burst to get the elemental mastery buff for your Hu Tao. It's not a bad setup whatsoever. It's just not quite as good as the other options we have, so I would generally default to them. Other option, if you don't need her, you can chuck Zhangling on the double hydro setup, so you can do double hydro plus Hu Tao and Zhangling. Hu Tao will actually be able to battery Zhangling a bit, so that team generally you probably want catch is the way to go for weapons. If your catch is busy on someone else, go for a stat stick like Deathmatch or Dragon's Bane, or grab yourself Favonius Lance. Artifacts for Zhangling, Emblem of Severed Fate, very standard. Energy recharge or attack on the energy recharge, attack or EM on the sands, whatever you have better substats on between attack and EM, and you pick energy recharge or the other two based on what your weapon is. If your weapon has energy recharge, go attack or EM. If your weapon has crit rate or attack or something like that, go energy recharge sands. Pyro damage on the goblet, and circlet is crit rate or crit damage. Now, some other options you have is you can actually also go double cryo if you want to, letting you melt off the freezes instead. I would probably only go double cryo if you either absolutely have to, or if you're versus non-boss enemies that can actually be frozen. So for double cryo, generally Rosaria or Kaya are the way to go. For one of the slots, Rosaria or Kaya, very similar builds. Use either the deathmatch, any crit stat stick for Rosaria, is perfectly fine. If you have to, something like Dragon's Bane wouldn't be the worst. Favonius Lance also pretty solid here. Artifacts, basically anything, any of the attack sets, any cryo set, any 2-piece cryo, any 2-piece noblesse, perfectly fine here for her. Even possibly if you wanted to, you could go emblem, but generally you don't run enough energy recharge for emblem to be super good. Standard build, attack, cryo damage, and crit rate or crit dam, depending on what you need. Talents, level up the Ian burst. Why Rosaria is good. More concentrated damage, better during Hu Tao's burst. Crit rate buff that can help your Hu Tao's crit rate. Other option, though, is Kaya. Kaya's more consistent damage over time, but has less burst potential, so generally ends up being a little bit worse, but you can use him as the first cryo slot anyway. Weapons, you want to go for the Inazuma Crafted, just because it basically gives him enough energy to not really have to worry about building any energy recharge. Artifacts, same thing as Rosaria. Any 2-piece cryo, any of the 2-piece attacks are good. 2-piece noblesse is good as well. Talents, E and burst are what you want to level up. Now for the last slot in double cryo, Diona is generally the way to go. She gives you a shielder, she gives you a healer, she can give you an EM buff if you have high constellations. Generally a bit better than Layla, because Layla, if her shield breaks, is kind of pointless. So it's kind of a balancing act where if your shield is going to break, which presumably if you're running double cryo, you're probably not C1, so you're probably jump canceling, not dash canceling, taking more hits. If you can get the shield to not break ever, Layla can be good here, but otherwise go Diona. We're going to go builds real quick. Diona, Sackbow, or Fabbow. Sackbow generally being a little bit better artifact set. Noblesse, HP, and healing bonus on Circlet. Talents, level up the E, level up the burst. Diona especially can get a little bit better than Layla at C6, where you can get some elemental mastery for your Hu Tao. Although the advantage, that does mean you have to heal your Hu Tao, which can be a little bit of a damage loss, but whatever. Layla, a little bit different. Weapons, Favonius. Sword is 100% the way to go on her, as we don't really have a super good HP sword. There's the 5-star, but I would probably just go Favonius anyway. Just because energy is nice. Artifacts. Millith is generally the way you want to go on her. I would go HP on all 3 of her mains. You do have the option to go crit rate on Circlet if you need it to hit enough crit rate for your Favonius to actually proc relatively often. Level up her E, level up her burst. I believe that is every extra unit I wanted to cover for Hu Tao. The section was quite long, but as you can see, after Xingqiu and Hu Tao, there is actually quite a few options that you have to play around with. Alright, now here we are for the rough rotation run through. I will be using the double Hydro team. The only real difference between the double Hydro and the double Pyro team is what you swirl. In the double Pyro team, you try to swirl Pyro. If you can, you try to double swirl, but if not, you just try to swirl Pyro. And double Hydro, you try to swirl Hydro. So, very, very similar rotations. So you generally will lead with whatever application you need, be it Hydro or Pyro. Then you'll VV. Cast Kazuha Burst. Xingqiu Burst, Yelan Burst afterwards because it's a shorter duration, and then you'll pop E on Hu Tao and just start charge attacking. You generally want to count your charge attacks, and when you get to about like 6, 7, or 8, you want to burst. I bursted way late there in the rotation, but whenever you get around that 7 or 8 margin, you want to burst on Hu Tao because you want to catch the end of your increased damage from your E skill. But that's it for the rough rotation. Very, very simple. Just spam N2Cs or N1Js. Actually, you know what? We'll reset, get a different team, and I'll actually show off the jump cancels so y'all can see the difference. Give me 1 second. Alright, I'm back. I swapped up the team as bit as well to chuck a shielder in there because shielders are generally, I would generally recommend shields if you do not have C1. But we will do a C1 rotation. They are basically the same. The only difference is the jump attacks instead of the other ones. So I also bought double pyro this time just to kind of show off the double pyro rotation. And with jumps, you generally want to do about 6 or 7 before you burst. It actually went a little bit better because I sequenced my stuff like a heck of a lot better that time. But yeah, normally dash cancels are better. I just messed up some of my dash cancels. But as you can see, you can still absolutely nuke stuff with jump cancels. So don't feel too bad to run C0 Hu Tao. If you want to, I would just highly recommend a shielder if you're going to do so. But anyway, that is going to do it for me here today, this week. I want to thank you for coming out. I hope you enjoyed. I know this one was a little bit longer, but the character had a lot to say about, and the teams aren't really different enough that I wanted to split them into different videos, so I wanted to make sure I just covered everything in this one video. But I hope you enjoyed. I wish you luck on your rolling endeavors if you're rolling for Hu Tao or Yelan, or both. If you want to know if the weapon banner is worth it, just quick TLDR, maybe. So the truth is that Elegy is just straight up better for Yelan in like 90% of her teams. So you kind of wish it was, you know, Homa Elegy is probably the best weapon banner there could possibly be. But it's not that bad if you still need a generalist bow for somebody like Tanari or Fischl or Yelan or whoever. But I think if you want to get C1 Hu Tao instead, I think I'd get C1 Hu Tao and Yelan, or I'd get Yelan and Hu Tao instead of trying to get Hu Tao plus Homa. That's just my opinion. I want to thank you for coming out. I'll see you next week, where I'm pretty sure we are going to be doing Quicken or Spread Al Hytham. I believe that is what I have decided to do next week. I did side note, I did just use my free wishes, and I did roll Tanari, so Tanari will be on an episode coming up relatively soon once I actually finish leveling him. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming out. I hope you have a great day, and I hope they buff Daya again, because right now she's looking not so good, and I want her to be good.